What's up, everybody? Happy Wednesday. Welcome back to another episode of Tech Backstage. Today, I am joined by CEO and co-founder of BizMerlin HR, Amrinder Arora. Amrinder, how you doing today?
Very good, Eddie. Thank you for having me, and happy Wednesday, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for being on the show. I'm super excited to dive into to the topic. It's a couple things that are really near and dear to my heart. I love all things AI and machine learning right now. I really love data analytics and as a growing startup, people operations and HR are really top of mind, and our people are kind of priority number one for us. So excited to like sit down and talk about a little bit more about the impact AI has on the human resources industry. Before we do that, would love to hear a little bit about your background, your backstory, and how you ended up coming to co-found and be the CEO of BizMerlin HR for the audience.
Absolutely happy to share. So I think when I was doing my education, I did undergraduate, graduate, doctorate, everything in computer science. I was a very much of a computer scientist person. My most of my doctorate work was in AI, and when I after that, when I entered the industry, so I was a CTO for a couple of different companies. Ended up having a great amount of fun, made a good impact with a few different software applications we launched. One thing that I noticed right at that moment was how much real impact you could make if your application actually touched millions of people. You could really see, right? They could be using the application, and their lives would be so much better for the simple change that the application is bringing to them. And that really stuck with me for a while. And then when we came to be trying to solve this operational workforce planning issue for some consulting organizations, we came to solve this specific problem as part of BizMerlin HR. We realized that for these global multinational kind of companies that were in the mid-size, they were not necessarily a Microsoft or an IBM with tens of thousands of people, but they still had a lot of the same needs, and their HR industry was just not catering to their needs. It was a very much an underserved segment there. Then we founded BizMerlin HR at that point. That was about 10 years ago. Time flies so fast. It was
Wow.
2013, and co-founded it, got it started. The product launched around 2016 timeframe, and since then we've never looked back. So it's been a great fun ride. And this is, this really came right when AI revolution was coming up. So in that sense, I think we were considered very lucky. And of course, the HR industry has been seeing a tremendous growth for the last 10 years and
Yep.
forecast for the next 10. So timing team turned out to be right.
Yeah, right on the front of the wave. I love that. As we're kind of diving into this, I think also it's probably really important to understand kind of the traditional role that HR played in organizations, right? I've talked about this before on this show, but there was a time not so long ago that enjoying your job and mental health and wellness and career advancement, those were topics he didn't really talk about. You know what I mean? I remember in the 90s, I worked for my dad, but I also worked at some local businesses, and wasn't really the way it is right now, right? So I think also for BizMerlin HR, you guys were really kind of right at the beginning of that. If you launched in 2016, you guys were kind of already right in the midst of that transformation, right? How did you kind of see that playing out, even before we start getting into the AI part, but how did you guys kind of start seeing that transition play out when you started the company?
I mean, overall, you're spot on that what we have seen in the last 7 years is that the role of the CHRO, or the Chief People Officer, as might be called in some organizations, Chief Human Resources Officer in other places, it has really grown, and the charter has really grown. And now the people who turn out to be the CHROs, they really have a seat at the table, and they're often being given the toughest challenges that the business has to solve. So in that sense, that really, I think, started it for us, in the sense that we saw that HR was not the traditional HR, which was, hey, we get your W-4, we're gonna make sure that you get your I-9, we get your I-9, and we'll get your tax paperwork at the end, and you're signed up correctly for the health insurance. That's about it.
Right.
Other than that, if you hear from us, that's bad news. That's not at all.
Love that. That's great. Yeah.
So that's what we saw, that this was all, this change was really happening. It was right here. And that the people that we were working with were and are absolutely top class. They are sort of architects of their organization. They are CHROs. They're trying to build a culture. They're trying to build a certain mentality in their workforce, and they're trying to make sure that their workforce is ready for 2022 and 2025 and 2030.
Right.
And the strategic mindset that they have, it's mind-boggling. And 20 years ago, if you talk to somebody, the question wouldn't even make sense. But now it's here. So
yeah, no, totally. We actually have a question from Melanie. So we're going to dive into this right now, but she wants to know, does talent management really start at talent acquisition? And I would love to know, as we're starting to dive into the AI side of what we were just talking about, how does that also translate into, is there use cases for not just on the HR side, but on the the talent acquisition and talent management side? Maybe we could talk about that as like our first use case example.
Yes. So I think that there's a lot within those questions to unpack. So, but first of all, let's just kind of see the use cases and the scenarios. I think that's a broader question, and then we'll go to Melanie's question at that point. If you see the overall HR, and like I was just mentioning, the CHRO's role has changed. It's partially because the requirements from what was traditionally considered the HR department has changed, right? Those requirements have changed. They're no longer make sure everything is compliant and there's no problems. That's no longer the charter. Rather, the charter is that, hey, we now want to become a data-driven company. We want everybody to have their OKRs defined, and we want to make sure that our workforce is ready for next 10 year, and we want to be able to bring in the people. So if a new person is kind of listening to all this, their head would spin. They're like, hey, Justin, those two sentences,
Right. Like what?
What do you want me to do again? So
Yeah.
it's a lot of things, there's just a lot of things. So for that reason, you need to make sure that you're acquiring the right talent, because you're acquiring the right talent, and then your internal talent is also very mobile. They're also going to change. They're agile. They're going to go from here to here. In the meantime, you want to bring the other people join directly over here, so that together at the time you have a consistent workforce that works well with each other, and then is able to solve the problems that your business is going to be solving, not now, but in those 3 years. So you have a very strategic mindset that you want to be able to handle. So in that sense, the AI now plays so many different use cases that it's like, you really have to think about multiple things. For example, you could be talking about candidate selection. You could be talking about job selection. By job selection, we mean sort of inverse of the candidate selection, where you're telling candidates which other jobs should they be applying to.
Right.
Maybe they applied here, but hey, don't you think you would be a better fit here? Which could be maybe a 2 steps up or possibly a step down from what they have applied to. But you look at their resume and you say, hey, based upon where we are, and every company has different titles, etc. So they might be a little bit off in what we're applying. Maybe they should be applying over here. And similarly, you want to be able to get some good system recommendations from your system on which candidates you should hire. Then you want to be able to see where exactly everybody is at from their competency perspective. So those skill assessments, they need to be constantly happening these days. Then you need to do a count of how many people you need to hire. All of those things that I'm saying are actually applications of AI. Each of those, each of those. And then where your employee records are lagging, what part is really missing, which people should now be promoted to a certain level, and what training should they be recommended so that they can be ready for promotion next. All of those are applications. So the applications are like, they can be head spinning for a moment.
Yeah.
But I do want to go to Melanie's question, because Melanie's question is very specific. She's talking specifically about talent management and talent acquisition. There, you have to again take a little bit broader viewpoint here. Talent acquisition, many times people would say, and I think the subtext behind that question a little bit is that, let's suppose a candidate comes into your door, right? A candidate comes in and you're trying to hire somebody for your show, and you're saying, hey, candidate, I think I like this aspect of the candidate, I don't like this aspect, and then you, based on that, you determine whether you're going to move forward or not. And then the question is that, was that your first opportunity, because that's the time the candidate came to the door? And
Right.
the answer is not really, because while you're here at this show and while you're putting some feelers out to your friends saying, hey, we're looking for a new person that does this and this, or you have a job description that you have posted on your favorite job boards, you know, you are already putting out into the universe what your company is all about, what the work is all about, who the right people are, and who should actually plan to, you know, plan
Right.
to apply. So in that sense, it really goes everywhere. And
Yeah.
that's why, to Melanie's question, talent management begins really much, much, much earlier. But
Yeah.
like I said, there's a lot more to unpack here.
Yeah, and I love kind of where you're going with that too, especially with with using AI. For example, when we're recruiting people, a lot of times, I think we have like 11 open job positions right now, right? But right now, it's very much a manual process of, oh, hey, we have this one person that's in this more front end role, but they also have some of the back end technology experience that we're looking for. But it's very much like you identify that while they're in the pipeline, right? The system's not necessarily recommending that to you, right? So, in this case, you're talking about AI in this scenario where, having it implemented from the recruiting, you're talking about, oh, hey, we can actually use AI to identify people that are in our process that have specific skill sets that, maybe even soft skill sets, right? Maybe these people, you can identify them as being a good candidate from work for home or not a good candidate for work from home. So you're like, oh, this is somebody that probably should work in our office, not from home. But like you're talking about, to Melanie's point, it's like, in order for you to be able to manage the people that are in your organization, I mean, they kind of got to be a good fit to start with, right? Because if they're not, then I think you're just going to kind of always be on the struggle bus with them, as far as it's always going to be kind of a back and forth. It's always going to be, oh, hey, like I didn't clock in on time this morning, because I'm working from home, and the person just doesn't have good good self-awareness of time. And so I think, to your point, is, being able to use AI to identify that stuff from, the 0 point of them entering into your process, and being able to say, oh, they applied to this job, but they're a better fit for this job, and they're actually a good fit for, work from home, and they can work with this type of client because they have this specific skill set. So does using AI, like, I mean, it sounds like, first and foremost, it can help you improve efficiency, but it also sounds a little bit like it can actually help you potentially speed up some of the things or maybe not the processes, but help you maybe speed up the time to make the final decision.
Right. So I think, so two aspects there. Firstly, you're spot on that the AI, the technology, can actually help you automate some of these processes right at the beginning. So I work with customers all day long. When one of the things that they say is, with BizMerlin HR, they're trying to have this position, so they can give some other indicators to the HR system, and it would automatically create a job position draft for them based on that. And all they have to do is saying, yes, it looks fine, even though we did not know we needed this, but yes, you're right, the system, please go ahead and publish it.
Right.
So you don't take the control away from them, but you give this ready for them to say, hey, based on what you have told us elsewhere, the body of work that you have, the competency levels that you have, competency levels that you need, we believe that you need this position to be open right now so you can have this work done. The system recommends it, they approve it, publish it, the job is ready to go. Then, of course, when the
Love
candidates
that.
start coming in, the system can understand that, hey, at this point, you're already ready for an offer letter. Based on where this candidate sits, we think this is a good draft offer letter. You can, of course, change anything you want before you send it to the candidate, but at least it's there. This is human nature. we are all much better editors than we are creators. If you
Right.
tell me to create a new script, I might have a writer's block. I might have like, okay, I'll get to it. I'll do it. Don't worry, I'm gonna do it, Eddie. I'll promise I'll be done tomorrow morning. Tomorrow close of business. Day after tomorrow morning for sure. By this weekend I'll get it to you, and we'll dilly dally on that. But you tell me, hey, I put together this draft. Do you think it looks okay? I'm gonna say, Eddie, you didn't really do a very good copywriting job. I'm gonna nitpick here. I'm gonna nitpick here. That's fine.
Right.
So let the system do this work of creating something. And then people are very good editors. People saying, no, I want to do this, I want to do that. Sure, go crazy on that. But at least the system takes this initial steps, which helps you, get something in front of people, and they can tweak it and move forward. This is how you bring
Yeah.
efficiency into the game, and still, keeping in nature the human nature. That's how we work, and that's fine.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't want to dive too far into, the way that AI and machine learning works, but you're actually kind of describing, how an AI, algorithm actually improves because, it would make a recommendation, you would edit it to how you like it, and then you would refeed it back into the system and it would use that information to kind of self-correct itself, right? But what you're talking about right now, like we're not talking about a fully automated, like sentient AI where you're like, hey, just go out and do this and tell me when you're done with it, right? We're very much, years away from that sort of workflow. But what you're talking about right now is really more of a guided relationship with AI, right? AI is making recommendations, you're checking them, you're tweaking them, based on your personal experience, and then you're, making the updates where necessary, right?
Exactly. So
Which,
in this,
yeah, go
yeah,
ahead. Sorry.
exactly. No, in this case, exactly right. That the system might recommend something, saying, "Hey, you should have this position open," but you, as the human, control. Yes, okay, go ahead, publish it.
Yeah.
The system might recommend this offer letter. You will say, yes, this looks fine, or I'm going to tweak it up or down. Then I'm going to send it. Or the system might recommend hire somebody, not hire somebody, and then you decide to go forward with it or not.
Yep.
So, all sorts of things that the system would do, the system will just make them as recommendations. And every time you do something or not do something, the system's learning from that as well. And then,
Yeah.
if maybe the system might recommend to hire somebody, and then maybe you do hire somebody, but then later on you see that this person doesn't work out. Of course, in your people operations database, the system's going to learn that,
Yeah.
saying that, hey, this turned out to be not a good recommendation because the person was not a good fit from a cultural perspective. The system's learning that, and the system
Yep.
will basically say, okay, hey, maybe we didn't make a right choice here.
So I got kind of I think this leads into a really good follow-up question, which, and we talk about this a lot in, when we're talking about modern day technology, because there's these feedback loops that recommendation engines get into. You talk a lot about like Facebook only feeding you information that you want to read. Same thing with Google, and there's even been, topics out there that are like I mean, they go as far as to say that, using, Google or Facebook can actually sway you politically or, one way or another. So I think this leads to a really important question, which is, can using AI lead to biases, right? I mean,
Absolutely. I mean, that should be the question number one, or if not question number one, certainly in the top three questions that any CHRO should be asking us every time they are starting to implement BizMerlin HR, or they are doing now starting to get some of the advanced use cases. And if they don't ask us, then we bring it up ourselves, and we say, hey, just you haven't mentioned this thing, but this is something very important to keep in mind. And the reason we say that is, and here I would like to quote somebody, one of the Gartner analysts, and Gartner is one of the leading, the firms that recommends a lot of these things, and we follow them. Vice versa, Gartner also quotes BizMerlin HR in many of their publications recently. So one of the things that I heard one of the Gartner analysts, Helen Poitevin, mention is that how do you handle this aspect of bias in AI inside the HCM context? And the answer is relatively simple. You look out for it. You don't assume it's data. You don't assume that because it's machine, it is not going to have bias. And you also don't assume the contra positive here, saying that, hey, because it's machine, of course it'll have bias. Not true. You look out exactly what the machine is recommending, think about what exactly the recommendations it's coming up with and what are the aspects of bias that could be there. Check for it, correct it, and then feed that back to the system saying that, hey, you're making recommendations based on anything that's protected that we cannot actually use. And many times the system will already be pre-set up to say, hey, these aspects cannot be used inside the prediction. Could be gender, could be age. You can use everything else that you have up to you. Could be, for example, interviewers comments, etc. But the short answer is, you be conscious about it, you be willful about it, you try to
Right.
say, hey, it could lead to bias, I have to be careful. I have this power today that I can actually run my AI engine on this thing, but let me use it correctly. Let me think about this aspect. Once you think about this aspect and you review it, you can always account for it, correct it, budget for it correctly. So I think this is not an unsolvable problem if you have the right will.
Right, but it's something you have to be conscious of. It's something that you have self-reg. You need to be checking it. You need to be making sure that you're not just blindly trusting the recommendations that the system spits out. Otherwise, you're going to end up in a feedback loop where, you might actually be, especially if we're talking about recruiting, you might even be excluding good candidates just because you're 100% relying on the AI, right? So, I think that's a really important point, and I think that also goes back to the broader topic of AI as a whole creating bias, which is, I think it's important for us to work on creating AI systems that that are able to have kind of a neutral stance towards things, right? So, and this is kind of where it might also be good to have my personal opinion and kind of experience is not just allowing one first person to feed in, the modeling to the, or the information into the AI, right? Where you have a team, because by doing that, you have different perspectives, you have different information feeding the model. And so from there, the AI, I think, and again, I think it goes back to the more information an AI model has, I think the more it can create informed decisions, as long as you're not trying to um, as long as you're not really trying to like steer it in a certain direction, right? So I think this speaks to the kind of like the broader topic about using AI, which is you want to give it a wide range of information, not just this is very narrow bandwidth, right?
Yeah, and specifically within this thing, within AI models, there this specific thing that we are looking at is called they're called classification models. So there could be some other kind of models like forecasting models, etc. Where here we're talking specifically about classification models. As an example, you are saying whether a candidate is to be recommended for hiring or not recommended. So that's a classification uh, labels that it's coming up with. So in the classification algorithms, in the classification models, because this has been studied so much, that those models are actually not so naive about these aspects of bias. They're actually already, and this is not even, people are saying it's cutting edge research. I finished my doctorate about maybe 17, 18 years ago. This was a well-known topic then. This is not new. Now AI and machine learning have become so much more commonplace now. But from an academic perspective, these things have existed for at least for a while. So for that reason, the classification models can entirely handle these kinds of things. For example, they can say, hey, for self-correction, we're going to make some recommendations which are not coming from the model, but we only want to do from audit perspective or learning perspective. So they do that.
Hmm.
And they're the right statistical models that also that allow them to make those recommendations to handle false positives or false negatives. So they have that. Again, if you're conscious about it, you can actually handle. And I do see there's another question on the chat
Yeah,
as well.
there's one more from Melanie, which I actually wanted to get to, and there's one from Omar too, talking about how COVID impacted the HR industry. But what I want to get to really quick, and then we're going to circle back to both of those questions, is because I think the next question that I'm going to ask you actually leads into Melanie's second question, and then we can circle back to talking about COVID and how it affected the industry. But first question, and I think this again will lead back to what Melanie's talking about. Does AI work in HR systems without any data, or how does that work?
Yeah. So that's a good question. I think that here we sometimes do hear this question from BizMerlin HR customers. Think they are a little confused about, hey, how can AI even help here, because we just are starting with this here. There's no data. How will the AI learn? So first of all, when you typically have your HR system implementation, you usually will have, you will not start from, oh, the entire old system is gone, so we're going to get rid of the data. You will typically have migrate the data. So from the data, it will learn whatever it can learn. For example, you would have certain job titles, certain promotions, certain career plans, etc. The system can automatically create career plans from there, even though you started using today only, right? Because you did bring in some history. Some other data points are which come from cross customer, which are just public data sources. So that means the system can always use that. And second thing is that that aspect of big data, if you recall, 5 years ago there was this phrase, buzzword, big data, big data, big data. But then after some time, people started realizing, hey, what about small data learning? So that, and in fact, a few years ago, there was this big study on how far AI was behind humans, because AI, just to recognize apples from tomatoes, was taking, I think, about 170 classification cycles, while human was taking about 3. So you could explain a new person who had never heard the word tomato or apple. You give them 2 or 3 times saying this is an apple, this is a tomato, and you show them 3 times. They're like, okay, I got it, right? You got it,
Right.
right? But the machine was like it's an apple. So it was like so far behind. And then we're like, no, that's no longer the status quo. That was really 3 years ago at least. By now the AI is actually much better than that. You don't wait for 10,000 new candidates before you're going to start making recommendations. You will start making recommendations after your, very few, after like maybe a 10 or 15. Of course they will continue to improve, but you don't want to wait until having your 10,000 or a million candidates, because many customers will never get to that, right?
Right.
Depending on the size of the customer. If you're a 500 people company, you're not going to have a million candidates for a little bit.
Yeah.
So first of all, that's the question. And you mentioned there was a second question.
Oh yeah, well, to Melanie's point too, right? Which is she wants to know about how AI can affect legacy applicant tracking systems. So you think it's going to present a challenge for integration with legacy ATSs, or do you think there's going to be an opportunity for integration with legacy ATSs?
Yeah, I mean, legacy ATSs are basically are on their way out. So when we see the customers if they're using BizMerlin HR, they might be using a legacy ATS, but then they also review what BizMerlin HR ATS can do. And then they can try to compare, and they're roughly looking at, hey, how do I handle the contract that I have with my legacy system? And they'll usually go to a modern ATS. Could be BizMerlin HR, could be another of the other modern ones. But in general, the legacy systems are legacy for that reason. They're not going to be able to, they were maybe written 30 years. Many of them were not even on cloud, or maybe they were since then moved to cloud, but it's still the, so I think that's basically that answer is that they are effectively going to go away. If
Yeah.
not now, another 5 years. Sometimes there's a aversion to change, but that's about it.
Yeah. So last minute or so here, just kind of want to circle back to Omar's question. Sorry for leaving you till last, Omar. But what impact do you think COVID had on the HR, I guess departments, but HR industries as a whole, and then also kind of like tacking on to what Omar says, how do you think AI has addressed some of those changes?
Yeah. Like when we see the COVID challenges of the pandemic or the other things that happened in the last couple of years here. First of all, so many things that were exceptional became the norm, or became at least part of the norm here. Right now, for example, there is no company that thinks of work from home as like, what? That's not,
Right.
you know,
That's not a thing.
that's we don't so that's no longer an option. Now many companies have gone saying that, hey, we no longer support it, that we're going to go all in, or we have accepted a permanent work from home, or we have accepted a permanent hybrid, or we have given you 40 days a year that you can work from home, no questions asked. So they have had to make those changes. And in this case, and then another aspect which was kind of piggybacked on top of COVID was this extremely tight labor market that existed from around 2020 till about mid of 2022. Only in the recent few weeks it started to loosen up. So both of these factors were quite significant. HR industry had to make a lot of changes. HCM systems, in this case, I would say more that the HCM systems that were cloud native. So like companies like BizMerlin HR, that was, they were much more agile, that they were able to handle these kinds of things from the get-go. People could create new forms, new custom fields, people could create new workflows, new process changes without depending upon us, the supplier. They could do everything on their own, saying, hey, now work for home, we have this form, that form follows the workflow, etc., etc. So in this case, more than the I think it was the modern tech that really helped those customers a whole lot more. AI supported it, but in this case, in this extremely, change ridden environment, it was having a modern tech that was their biggest, that was their the biggest help for them. AI was maybe secondary in that case, but overall, the companies that were on a modern cloud system fared better because they could pull off those changes faster.
Yeah. No, I love that. I think that's a really great example of the changes that we did see during the pandemic, but also just I think how we all kind of adopted or adapted to it, right? It was one of those things where it's like we didn't really have a choice. Like you said, like companies were like, well, we're not doing that work from home things. Like you don't really have a choice, so you just have to kind of you know integrate and adapt. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to survive through it. So I 100% agree with you there. So thanks for all the great questions, guys. We really appreciate it. We are out of time. Amrinder, I really appreciate having you on the show today. Would have loved to dive even deeper, but I think we hit some really good. Points today.
Absolutely, Eddie. Half hour for AI and HCM is always too short, but I'm
Right.
glad to get the conversation started.
Yeah, for sure. So thanks for being here. Before we go, Carlos, can we get next week's show announcements, please?
Certainly, Eddie. We have 3 shows, and the first one is going to be on Monday with Albert Saniger, the CEO of Nate. That's the name of the company, not the name of the guest, just so you know. He told me that there was this confusion sometimes. The company's Nate. Albert Saniger, CEO of Nate. Then on Thursday, we're going to be speaking with Stephanie Cox, the CEO of Lumavate. Lumavate, I'm sorry. Yeah, and then on Friday, we're going to be speaking with Joseph Schneier, the CEO of Trusty.care, which is a health tech company. So cool. That's what we have confirmed for next week. Join us right here on Tech Backstage at 12 p.m. Pacific time right here. And remember, be here or be square.
Thanks, Carlos. Thanks again, Amrinder. And thanks for listening in and all the great questions, guys. Talk to you soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.